Hey guys, so you ready for a new type of chess experience? I'm going to do something I've never done before, and I'm going to commentate on a game between two players. So earlier on today, I was contacted by Ted Philby, who has been playing, I think he's 13 years old, he's only been playing chess seriously for about a month, and we had a couple of games. I posted that on my channel, and then later on I heard from his dad, Bill Philby, who wanted to know if I'd be interested in maybe playing him and etc. Anyway, so my suggestion was, hey, why don't you two guys play each other? Because they're not too far apart in rating. So here we are in the game. So we have Dad Bill is playing with the white pieces and son Ted is playing with the black pieces. So Bill is rated 836 currently in Rapid. Ted is rated 1099, so knocking on 1100. So this is the chess family grudge match. Son versus father. Okay, so what have we got? So we've had e4, e5. We've got kind of Gioco Piano with 4 knights on the board. So it's the Italian game. Both players have brought out their bishops onto the c-file. All 4 knights are on the board. You couldn't slip a cigarette paper between these two right now. So also white has castled, black hasn't castled, so white's got in the extra pawn move on d6. So let's see how all this pans out. So what are we expecting from these two players? Well, according to Bill, that Ted maybe plays with a little more flair, but Bill thinks that he's slightly less prone to blunders than young Ted, aged just 13. So, Ted's brought out his queen in front of his king, and Bill has fianchettoed his dark squared bishop. They're on the queen side. So, are we going to see opposite side castling in this game? Now the 2 light squared bishops are facing off against each other. So I don't think Bill doesn't want to lose his bishop. He doesn't want it to be captured, and have to recapture with his b pawn. So he's brought up his d pawn there so that he can recapture with the d pawn if he has to. Now Ted has now castled long, so we do have opposite side castling. We've got white has castled on the king side, black has castled on the queen side, and this also means that black has put a rook straight onto the one of the center files, onto the d file. So I do notice now that white has this fianchettoed bishop, which is staring kind of the wrong way. It's looking down the very long diagonal. Bishops love to be on long diagonals. However, it's looking down here, whereas black's king is over the other side of the board. Maybe that's one of the reasons why black chose to castle queenside. Okay, so it's white to move. This is a very tight, involved position. White might need to think about getting his queen off the back rank. Okay, maybe we're looking at an early pawn storm here now. Well, it's not too early because everyone's developed, so we could see b4 kicking the bishop. The bishop doesn't have too many options. Okay, and black responds aggressively with a5. And this is going to put paid to any ideas of pawn to b4 because takes and the pawn is lost. However, it does open up a nice path there for the rook. Okay, so now with a4 we've now blocked off the a file. So we may only be left with pawn breaks on the b file if we're going to open up the king side the queen side of the board. Black's now come in and advanced his knight now to g4. There's no opportunity really for the queen to come down and look at the h2 pawn. And it doesn't really make sense for black to capture on f2, because if captures and rook takes and captures and king takes, then nominally it's kind of equal, but the general wisdom is that it's better to have the two minor pieces just gives you more flexibility and more opportunity later in the game than white's rook and one pawn. So let's see where we're going to go with this. So white to move, 26 minutes left on the clock. Black has nearly 29 minutes left, only used 1 minute of his time so far. So we still have this standoff between the light squared bishops there. I don't think anyone wants to flinch first. So if black takes, white could retake with the b pawn, thereby opening up a channel towards the king, so I don't think that's very likely. I can't see white recapturing with the d pawn, giving opportunity for black's rook. And right now we are kind of bunged up on this side of the board. Black has 3 pieces looking at the b4 square. Okay, so white has just moved his queen off the back rank. Very understandable. This means that the rooks are now protecting each other. They're now connected. And black is playing aggressively again with the h5 push. This can of course be met if the pawn comes too far forwards. Then we might see like g3 and blocking off again on the edges of the board, which means we're going to have end up playing in the center. This dark squared bishop is still looking somewhat unemployed at the moment. This diagonal maybe looks better, but the queen is kind of in the way. Maybe if the queen had gone to e2 instead of to d2, we could have had ideas of this bishop coming around there, protected by the knight, and assaulting here. So, right, white has flinched. White has decided to initiate the exchange. Now black has 2 options to recapture, pawn or queen, and he's gone for pawn, which is not bad for white because, yeah, so white now has a semi-open file, but it's his own pawn that's on the file. Are there ideas for this knight to come in and do anything? Maybe not right now. I mean, it can go here to g5 and it's protected by the queen, but where's it going to go after that? Both sides have pretty well coordinated positions right now. So I quite like the fact that black has moved these pawns, particularly this one on the A file. Okay, so white is now kicking the knight, and it looks like black hasn't noticed the threat or feels he can ignore the threat. So let's figure this out. Let's say pawn takes, pawn takes. Now we have an open H file that's just begging for this queen to come down. However, this knight is still covering the 2 main squares that the queen might go to. And we may also see, for example, white playing queen to g5 and trying to swap off the queens and protects himself there. But this king would, I think, feel a little bit more comfortable with a route out of that corner. Now, is white going to be tempted into taking the offered knight? Is this a poisoned piece? Or can white survive any potential onslaught? Interesting and aggressive play here from the youngster. It's Bill versus Ted. Most excellent. That will only make sense to people of a certain generation. Now, you good? Dad Bill is using his time. The youngster is being quite rash with his. He's only used just over 2 minutes of his 30 minutes, and we're well into the middle game already. So he's dangling that knight in front of Dad. So if I were white right now, I'd think about making more use of this dark squared bishop. I think it's looking somewhat awkward right now. Could even think about moving the knight round. Plug up g3 and just add more defense. So getting the knight to g3 would also cover h1, which is definitely a vulnerability on that side. But if we have, oops, let's put that in as a guess. So if we have that and that pawn takes, this knight will also have to move. But I think then knight to g5 looks pretty nice. There's no pawn on the F or the H files that can disturb it. So, okay, now we have. Okay, so excitement. It's all kicking off. H takes knight on G4. H takes G4. And now this knight needs to decide where it's going to go. And I would suggest forwards to here. Like we said, there's no pawn that can dislodge it from there. Only a piece can dislodge it. And the only pieces around are high value. Okay, now this is interesting. So now, I don't know whether white meant to do this, but he's now given back the knight, the one piece. I probably wouldn't have done that. Okay, so now we are looking at a situation where black is going to want to try and maneuver his queen round to this side, or even two rooks. I mean, rook to there, and then that, and the other rook into h2 could be checkmate in like 4 moves. And this pawn is now very annoying for white, because the g2 square and the e2 square are now out of bounds for the king. King can't go there. And now the knight is starting to come round. So I'd imagine we're going to see the knight maybe come to here. If knight there and bishop swaps off and queen takes, then okay, so now queen can't go straight to h6 because white's queen can snatch it off. Also can't go here. So the queen really wants to get onto the light squares, but is having trouble doing so quickly enough. Are we going to see the knight come around? Yes, we are. Now here there's the potential idea, if bishop takes, we could even consider f takes. Just trying to free up some space around the king, where the king could... okay. Now, there we go. I don't think there's any way of stopping queen h1 on the next move. Really don't think there is. Let's have a think about this. The knight can't move because queen to h1 is playable anyway, and if not, then the queen would be hanging. I think what we're looking at here is a bit of a case of an underestimated threat on the part of white. I think moving back a little bit, I think that this was probably an error. I think that the knight there would have been a lot more comfortable. Then he could have played f3, created a route out for the king. But this is looking pretty bad. Okay, and there we go, checkmate. Well done by black. Very aggressive game there. And a lovely finish, has to be said. Very good finish. So let's whiz through the game again. Let's see how it went. Okay, so 2 knights as normal, 3 knights game, 4 knights game. Now the bishops come out. Okay, so we've got a symmetrical position. White castles, black pushes d6. b3. Now to me this looks a little on the slow side. I mean, yes, it's preparing the fianchetto of the bishop, but we don't yet know which way this king is going to go. Alright, what do we have now? Do we have a rematch on our hands? Looks like we may. Okay, now youngster Ted is playing with the white pieces. Dad has responded against e4 with knight to c6, Nimzovich. And now knight to f3, so these knights are now staring off. Both of them can jump onto those 2 squares, but neither of them wants to because it'll get captured. What happens now? The grudge match continues. Join us after these messages. Really feel like I should have a beer and some popcorn at this point in time. So it looks like, was that an unrated game? Because Ted's rapid rating doesn't seem to have moved from 1099. Okay, we've got e5. So now we're in a standard position. So now we might expect the Italian to there. We might have the Spanish or the Scotch. And now we've got 2 knights out by white. Are we going to see 4 knights all over again? Are we going to see the boot on the other foot? We have 4 knights. The 4 knights game. I very rarely see this in my games. One exciting thing you can do with a 4 knights game is to play knight to d5 and then knight takes, and then you can go into the Halloween gambit, which is a whole barrel of fun. Very, very interesting game. So yes, as expected, we've got the same position in game 2 as we saw in game 1. Now white castles, and in the last game at this point it was Ted with the black pieces and he played d6, but now we've had h6 pushed. This is removing the g5 square from white's knight, because we don't want the knight coming in with a fork on the queen and the rook. Likewise, we don't really want the knight coming in and supporting the bishop to come with check on f7, forcing the king to move. So this is a defensive and prophylactic move. An alternative to this is also that some of the time black can play d5, but in this case I don't think it's possible, because there are 3 attackers on that square and there'd only be 2 defenders, second of which is the queen, so the queen can't capture. Okay, now we have the pawn push again. So very similar situation. It's white to move. White has castled as black has chosen to push h6 instead. And now Ted brings the queen off the back rank over there to e2. So what are we going to see now from black? I think bishop to g4 looks like a reasonable move. Okay, we've had castles short. Now we have same side castling, and bishop again. These 2 bishops face off against each other. Could see the pawn come forward. We could see the bishop drop back, even potentially to there. Let's put that in as a guess for me. So I've guessed bishop to b6. So it's interesting, if you watch other people's games on chess.com, you can drag the pieces to guess what they're going to play next, and then at the end of the game it tells you if you were a top guesser and how accurate you were with your predictions. But what is Bill going to decide to do? That's what we all want to know. Maybe bishop to g4 looks good. So I think this looks quite good for white if black has to capture then towards the outside of the board with the d pawn. But I think Ted might benefit. The young scallywag might benefit from looking into the Halloween gambit. I do have a video on it. It is a whole hoot and a holler. It really is. So basically you give up a knight in the 4 knights in return for the opportunity to push pawns up the board and crush your opponent's knights backwards. Alright, so we've had bishop to d7 from black, which is a sensible and solid move. And now white, as we thought, initiated the exchange. So black now does have the double pawns on the c-file, and white has now played rook a to d1, centralizing the rooks, maybe preparing for an advance or a break on the d-file, but it's not looking very promising right now, with 2 pawns now covering the d4 square. We have potential target on e5, which is currently protected by 1 knight. Pawn on b7 is undefended. Likewise, b2 is undefended on white's side of the board. I think everything else is more or less covered. This pawn is actually undefended also. So again, we have quite a compact, locked down position. And now the bishop's moved back to its starting square on c8. What's the reason for this? I mean, it's opening up the file for the queen, but I have to say that's a slightly confusing choice of move. When at this point in the game you want to be getting all of your pieces into the game, and that's just made it slightly harder and slower now for this rook on a8 to join in the fun. Another thought for black could be to maneuver the other knight round to the king's side. Extra defense there. That's a slightly odd choice of move. And that bishop could just as well have come forwards to here, pinning the knight. Okay, and now we have a threat. If bishop takes knight, we can have tripled pawns there on the c file, which would definitely be interesting. So are we going to see the bishop come back yet again to d7 so that it can recapture in the case of that capture? Or could we perhaps see the knight move? Okay, the bishop's come out. So black's last two moves have achieved absolutely nothing. Okay, bishop's going to take, I think. Yes, indeed. Now this bishop is slightly improved. It is looking down towards the g2 square. And yeah, so you see, as we said before, that this pawn was defended only by that knight. With swapping off the pieces there, the pawn can now be taken. Right? It may not be a terrible situation for black. I would expect to see the rook come across. No, the bishop's moved yet again, and instantly Ted jumps in with queen to e3, attacking this undefended pawn now on c5. So we see b6 is played, defending the pawn, and now d4, challenging in the center. At this point in time, I would definitely want to be centralizing a rook, I think. Other ideas could be even knight takes bishop. Okay, pawn takes, queen takes. So white is up one pawn. Okay, well this is acceptable, but knight can now take the bishop. The bishop's moved to an undefended square. Okay, now queen takes doesn't make any sense. So I think again, in this game, black has given away a piece completely unforced, and now we've got a situation where we've got white with an extra pawn and an extra knight. So it's looking like black has got his work cut out for him in this game. So pawn has come forward to c5. It's attacking the rook. So I'd imagine the rook's going to have to move. There are no good checks. The question is, where does the rook move to? That's not a bad place. So I guess we've got ideas now of doubling up the rooks on the open d file. Knight now comes in to hit the rook one more time. There's nowhere, the rook can't go to any of these squares safely. Could possibly go to c6, but not a huge amount of point. I think rooks actually love to be on the 7th rank, so I'm thinking that d7 would be a good move now. It also means that we'd have two attackers against this pawn on a7. So if I were in white's shoes, I think I would definitely consider that as a candidate move. But he's going to have to do something with that rook. Again, I still want to see this rook come out. We've got two open files in the middle of the board. Okay. Yeah, I want to see rook to e8. I'm gonna predict that one. Rook f to e8. Force the knight to move. Okay, and the rook has indeed moved to there. opening himself up for a fork. There we go. That was a bizarre prediction on my account because it was turned out to be a poor move. But you could see why it was tempting. Yes, indeed. So I think basically black now has to capture the knight. Ah, no. Okay. So you're going to swap the other knight. Okay. It's now getting fairly desperate because black is now a full rook down. And if you get into an endgame with a full rook difference, that should be a walkover for the player with the extra rook. Okay, the knight's just moved back. It's looking pretty tough now for black. This knight actually has nowhere really to go safely. Can't go there, can't even go there. That's the one square where it might go. Okay, king's moving out the way, and now we have a pin. So the rook is, okay, looking to exchange itself off. Yeah. And now knight's going to take rook, king's going to take knight. And that did not work out well. There we go. Second game, 2 wins to young Ted. Dad Bill, unfortunate yet again in the second game. So there we go. Bragging rights go to the youngster, the young lad in this family chess feud. And looks like we're going to come to a third game, but it's not going to be a decider because it's 2-0 to young Ted at this point in time. Right, let's see what happens in game number 3. Join us after these messages. Ad break. You might have time to pop a beer. Okay, e4 as predicted. And we're probably expecting e5 to come and then knights to come out into the board if it's the last 2 games are anything to go by. Or are we going to see something surprising and different? We'll see. So Dad Bill is now playing with the white pieces once again. Young Ted is playing with the black pieces. There we go, e5 is played. Are we going to see a break from the norm? Or is it going to be knight to f3, knight to f6, knight to c3? No, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, knight to f6, I think is what we've seen on the previous games. There we go, knight to f3 indeed comes. And knight to c6. Is white going to mix it up this time with Italian, Spanish, Scotch? We have the Spanish game. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ruy Lopez is on the board. Okay, black has responded with knight to f6, putting the question to the bishop. What is the bishop intending to do? Is it going to capture? In which case, normally I think d should recapture. Sometimes black will put the question to the bishop with a6 pawn push. And we have queen to e7. This has the effect of actually blocking in this dark squared bishop, so maybe a fianchetto over the dark squared bishop might be a good alternative. Adding a defender to the pawn on e5, potentially. The queen's also defending this pawn, because in the last game, remember, we had an occasion where the knight was the only defender of the advanced pawn, and then when it was swapped off, this knight was able to jump in and grab the pawn. d3 again is pushed. Seems to be a consistent theme. I'll probably see d6 at some point. Or maybe castling by white, we'll see. Okay, interesting. So young Ted has now pushed his queen out into the board pretty early on in the game. Queen can't take the bishop, can't take the knight. It's begging to be kicked with a3. or even bishop to c2 and then ideas of a discovery. But that wouldn't work because it would drop the bishop. So maybe a3 might be good. There we go, a3 as predicted. So what's the queen going to do? This is going to lose tempo for Ted. Moving back here would beg for for b4. Okay, the queen's moved again. Are we going to see b4 anyway? No, we see castles. Okay, so Bill has decided to err on the side of caution and get his king to safety, which is not a bad idea. Interesting pawn move. It does actually remove the queen's escape on that side, so I would certainly be looking at opportunities to trap this queen. Let's say b4 is played. There's loads of squares where this queen cannot go. The only available square, I think, would be to move. Oh, nice move. Nice move. Has Bill managed to trap Ted's queen? I think he may have, you know. I think young Ted may be eating his words at this point in time. Wow, stunning. If queen takes bishop to try and regain some material, and the knight ends up on b5, then we've got a problem of the knight threatening c7 and a fork there. Wow. It seemed like a rash move bringing your queen out so early, and indeed it was. And then I think that Ted compounded it by pushing d6 prematurely. But this was a really good move. I mean, I was looking at b4, but that still left one escape square. How can we defend against that? Boom, and a shock resignation. There we go. So Father Bill has managed to regain some dignity from the first two defeats with a crushing 8-move win. Smackdown. Okay, so I think congratulations all round. We've seen some solid chess. We've seen some nice tight positions, but in the third game, just a crushing win to put the youngster in his place. So thank you for watching. This has been Family Chess Smackdown Grudge Match. Thanks for watching. See you soon.